Humans are social creatures. As we evolved, it was to our benefit to pay attention to those at the top. Fascination with celebrity may be an outgrowth of that natural tendency. Welcome to another episode of my weekly podcast, Later That Same Life. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and on this series, topics, discussions, stories from our lives.
Season 8, Chapter 5.
If you are a regular listener to this podcast, you know that sometimes I do topics of substance and sometimes of whimsy. This week, more the latter. I'm calling this episode, Every Celebrity I Have Ever Met. I'm not particularly enamored of celebrities, although it's pretty cool to meet them occasionally. Someone who previously may have been larger than life on a screen, on a stage, in a stadium, in a magazine with the rich and famous. And suddenly there they are, right beside you, talking to you as if they were a regular human being. Plus, generally speaking, they are people of some accomplishment. So it's just fun to meet them, chat as much as you can. And then you also have a story to share with your friends about meeting a celebrity. These kind of stories come up occasionally when you're talking with friends. Someone famous may come up and you can say, I met them once. After one of these recent conversations, someone asked me how many celebrities I have met. Never thought about that. Quite a few, I think. So today, the list. Compare it to your list. And I would love to hear from you through social about celebrity experiences you may have had, good or bad. Oh, and there's my definition of celebrity. You have to be widely known across at least 2 countries, and your status has to come from sports, show business, or media. Some politicians become celebrities, and I've met a few of those, but they will not be included in this podcast. I'll start chronologically and then jump around a bit. Here we go. The very first celebrity I can remember meeting was Hall of Fame Toronto Maple Leaf goaltender Johnny Bower. Johnny Bower was born and raised in the same general area of Saskatchewan that I was. He often came back to the area in the off-season, and one year came to our small town's hockey banquet. My dad took me and made sure I met him and got his autograph. I was so nervous. Years later, and completely coincidentally, I'm walking by Maple Leaf Gardens, and I see Johnny Bower walking the other way. "Mr. Bower," I yell as I wave. He kept walking, turned around, waved back, and said, "Call me Johnny." I chronicled this and more in my previous podcast series, I Was 8. It's Season 5, Chapter 7 of that series, and it's called Johnny Bower. Growing up in a small town in the middle of the Great Canadian Prairie, well, not a lot of famous people came through. As a matter of fact, I went through a celebrity drought for over a decade. In Saskatoon, I worked at the campus FM station. My next celebrity was singer Glenn Yarborough. I know that's pretty obscure, so I'll save you having to look him up. He was a folk singer, previously part of the folk group called the Limelighters. He was now out on his own on a concert tour, and he played the local soft seat music theater. As our station had a folk music show that I occasionally hosted, I was granted a backstage interview with Glenn Yarborough. The portable tape recorder I had was the size of a briefcase. Johnny Bower, and then Glenn Yarborough, all within about a 10-year period. I was definitely running with the in-crowd. A short time after that, Bruce Cockburn was on our campus, and he visited our radio station. I met him. Next stop on my radio career, Winnipeg. One guess who I met in Winnipeg. Of course, like every Winnipegger, I met Burton Cummings backstage at a solo concert. It turns out his mom, Rhoda, was a big fan of my radio show. I guess I was her celebrity. We had just met Burton Cummings, and all the room could hear was this older woman screaming, "Where's Larry? I want to meet Larry. I hear Larry is here. Where is he?" I was about to say to Burton, "Hey, who's the old lady?" Until Burton said, "Mom, over here." Rhoda and I stayed in touch for many years after that. When I was in Winnipeg, it was about 500,000 people, and every one of them at one time either lived next door or went to high school with Burton Cummings. It was pretty amazing. Also, my time in Winnipeg was the same time Bobby Hull played for the Jets. Met him a few times. Seemed like a jerk. I know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but despite what the Catholics will tell you, death does not forgive you your sins. One day in Winnipeg, Playboy Bunny and November cover girl Patty McGuire came up to the radio station. I'd purchased a copy of that particular issue for the Jimmy Carter interview, of course. Yeah, that's right. We all remember the infamous Jimmy Carter interview. It was kind of odd meeting her. She was nice, but, I'm trying to talk to a stranger pretending that I'd never seen her naked. She went on to marry tennis superstar Jimmy Connors, and they're still married over 40 years later. Near that time, my wife and I vacationed in Los Angeles. We had tickets to the Tonight Show and to the Comedy Store. We'd also read about this restaurant that apparently famous people went to in L.A. It was called Hamburger Hamlet. It was high-end, white tablecloths, waiters in tuxedos, but they served hamburgers. We went. We saw Sally Struthers at the next table. My wife and I debated about which one of us should go up and say hello to her. We both chickened out. Sally left with her date. Later that same evening, we're in the Comedy Store. There with his buddies is Sally's All in the Family co-star, Rob Reiner. What a coincidence. My wife and I debated who should go over there and say hello. Eventually I did go. I said hello. I got his autograph. Super nice guy. He asked where I was from. I said Canada, and he asked me about Quebec. Was Quebec leaving Canada? This was like 1978. I said I didn't think so. So far, I'm right. On stage that night was Shelley Berman, the legendary comedian and actor who eventually played Larry David's father in Curb Your Enthusiasm. We didn't meet him, but it was cool to see his act. A couple of nights later, we went back to the Comedy Store for another show, and this time we actually met Jimmy J.J. Walker.
Pure dynamite!
Oh, dynamite indeed. He was just hanging out on Sunset after his set. Again, very nice person. By the way, the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, there was Kenny Rogers, Carl Reiner, and Bill Cosby. Didn't meet any of them, but what a show. After the monologue, when they went to commercial, Johnny dropped the F-bomb. That was so cool. Hey, Johnny swears just like us. I've been back to the Comedy Store a few times over the years. Met Andrew Dice Clay one night. He was just hanging out on Sunset after his set. Super nice guy, very quiet. He was standing next to a massive Harley that I assumed to be his. That same trip, one night we saw but didn't meet a young comic who the next night was going to make his network TV debut on Arsenio Hall. He had dropped by the club to work out some material. That comic was Chris Rock. As a kid, he was so funny. And the next night I watched him on TV, and he did a controversial date rape joke that actually got a lot of backlash. And I remember thinking, gee, I hope that doesn't kill his career. I spent just over a decade at radio station 680 CFTR in its heyday as the #1 music station in Canada. People that I worked with, like Tom Rivers, were themselves huge local celebrities. But to me, they were just people I worked with. Very talented, yes, but, co-workers. You'd think with our radio station status, I would have met everyone in the day. Not really, but yeah, some cool folk. It was Toronto. We were on the map. Oddly, it was during that time that I met Phyllis Diller. She guested on my show, and it bookended another Phyllis Diller experience, which I've also chronicled in my Phyllis Diller episode of this very podcast series. I think it's a good story. If you want to go back, it's episode 28. Leslie Nielsen was a hoot. just as deadpan funny in person as you might think. At the time, he had this little device that he would hide in his hand. I know that he also took it on a few national TV talk shows, so you might have seen him do this. Basically, it made a huge fart sound. So when he'd meet someone, he'd shake their hand, and then he'd suddenly make this very subtle, pained expression on his face and let the fart rip. Sounds like a cheap juvenile joke. I guess it is, but somehow he made it work. He did it to everybody, including our company VP, who had come down to meet him. It was also funny to watch people react. Some got it, some did not. Wow, Leslie Nielsen, he just farts at will. Best, though, for me personally was John Candy. At the time, John Candy had a syndicated weekly radio show, and it was important that the show did well on Canada's biggest station. So he came in for a day and recorded some ads for it. And then he just hung out. I got to record some improv with him. It was said that John Candy could read just about anyone quickly and then give you right back to you. Didn't matter if you were a media executive, construction worker, or made sandwiches at the cafeteria. He could relate to you, and he was instantly your best friend.
A lot of things, but I'm not a thief.
Amazing human. During a promotional trip to Los Angeles, I met Amanda Burse. Most famously, she played neighbor Marcy on Married with Children.
Someone wants you for sex? What do you have, a pet orangutan who's lonely? And not picky?
Cordial and lovely. One time in Toronto, our station was involved in a celebrity softball game and an after party. I met Anson Williams and Donnie Most of Happy Days, Stephen Campman, who at the time was on Newhart, and Martin Short. We talked about him being on SNL. Also in Toronto, working an event, I met Keith Morrison, and another one, I met Lloyd Robertson in the green room. He said, "Oh yes, Larry, I enjoy your work." I think he also said that to the janitor. Near the end of my tenure there, Jerry Seinfeld. He was doing a stand-up show. Plus, he was promoting a new TV sitcom called The Seinfeld Chronicles, eventually just Seinfeld. Good luck with all that. I interviewed him and then later that night saw his show. It was the first stand-up I'd ever seen where audience members were shouting out requests for certain jokes, as if they were songs at a music concert. Do the Tide bit. Play the hits. I dabbled in stand-up myself during those years, a Yuck Yucks comic. One celebrity that stands out, Bob Saget. This was just before he had all those TV shows. But he was a comic from LA, so he was like a hero to us. He told me I was very funny and to keep it up. At the time, I thought that was my ticket to stardom. Found out later, though, that almost everyone had a story about Bob Saget encouraging them. Because, this kind of peer support in the stand-up comedy business is rare. Rodney Dangerfield came to the club one night after his show at the Big Concert Hall. We all got to say hello, so I sort of met him. Technically, I did. It was just for a few seconds, but, enough to show him some respect. When I started out at Yuck Yucks, Howie Mandel's career was just exploding. Jim Carrey had just showed up, not a star yet, but everyone knew that this was a special talent. So I met them. I guess I know them. I mean, I don't have their phone numbers or anything, but, if we bumped into each other on the street one day, there's a better than 50-50 chance they might say, "Hey, Larry." Interestingly, that during all that time at the big music station, I didn't meet a lot of music stars. Well, there's a few. Billy Joel, met him in a receiving line backstage at Maple Leaf Gardens after his show. My coworker Rick was on my left. He met him first. And you should know that in these types of situations, your goal is don't say anything stupid. Say hello, give them a compliment, let them move on. No, not Rick. He's trying to make a personal connection with Billy Joel. "Hey, Billy, I think my wife is friends with your wife. She works as a designer in New York. They did the McGregor Project. Remember that? Her name is Lisa. You probably know her too." Billy is looking very uncomfortable. I'm nudging Rick in the ribs. "Shut up. X-nay on the Ife way." After Billy was down the line, I said to Rick, you know, he just left his wife for Christy Brinkley. Am I the only one who reads the Inquirer? I think that whole conversation was very awkward for him. Rick is like, oh man, should I go over there, say something, say I'm sorry? And I was just like, no, leave it. I'm sure Billy Joel will be okay. Let me see who else. Oh, backstage, Belinda Carlisle. That was an instant crush. Oh, but the big story backstage before a Eurythmics show that I was to MC. I'm in this little foyer. I can hear in the other room Dave Stewart and the other musicians warming up and discussing chord changes. Annie Lennox walks in. She stops. She's like a foot from my face. She says, hello, how are you? I am so instantly smitten. She had such a presence. I'm in awe. I'm stunned. And you know, I couldn't come up with an answer. How am I? Wait, just a minute. I know this. I think I might have said, fine, how are you? But I also may have passed out for a few seconds. I do count that as a meet. Oh yeah, and this one time we hosted an after party with Hall and Oates. They were cool. Also at the party was Eugene Levy. I was more thrilled to meet him. I said to him, you are like my favorite. Without missing a beat, he said to me, and you are my new best friend. One day at a press conference in a very small room, just a select group of people, Paul McCartney waved at me because we had on almost the same jacket. So didn't meet him, but that's my lame Paul McCartney story. You know, if I ever do meet him, I could say something like, hey, remember that time 40 years ago? You waved at me? Remember? We each had kind of a taupe jacket. I still have mine. I went to a radio station called The Mix. And on a side note, if you ever have a chance to work for Gary Slate, pass. Apply for EI. Beg for change on a street corner. Rob a gas station. Anything else, just pass. Not a ton of celebrity meetings there, but a few choice ones. Penn and Teller. And yes, Teller did talk when the mics were off. Phil Collins came by one day, nice guy for a rock star. Tom Poston was a great memory. He's a comedic actor who was good friends with and appeared on every sitcom that Bob Newhart ever did. Met Bobby Orr, who sent my son, who was a hockey defenseman who wore number 4, a cool autographed action shot that my son still has. I know Bobby Orr may have gone a bit Trumpian since, but still, I have that fond memory from when he was still with us. Incidentally, one of the worst celebrity meetings ever, Don Cherry. I know, people love him, but he was a pompous windbag the day I met him. Called me Terry, despite being corrected twice, and not by me. Perhaps he sensed that I was a pinko.
Well, actually, I'm wearing Pinko for all the Pinkos out there that ride bicycles and everything. I thought I'd get it in with these left-wing Pinkos. They scrape the bottom of the barrel.
My list of celebrities that I've met really grows during my time at Kiss FM in Toronto, a country station. Because you see, country stars really love radio. They thank radio at their music award shows. They show up at the radio stations. Not like rock stars, who in general think they're too big to actually show up at a radio show that isn't Howard Stern. Mind you, today, radio, I don't know, what is it even? Yeah, so I'd met and chatted with all of the big stars, and to a person, great people. Well, Steve Earle, and I'm sure he is a great guy, but I was told before the interview, he does not suffer fools gladly. So if you make a mistake referencing one of his songs or one of his performances, he will let you know about it. Also, he's recently off the booze and the drugs, so he's having a tough time. Man, I did my homework like never before. Sweated out the days until he showed up. And minutes before the interview was about to start, one of his people says to me, oh yeah, by the way, Steve just quit smoking, so he's not in a great mood. Okay, not a happy guy at the time, but it all went well. But yeah, great folks that I met in country music. Reba, Garth, Faith Hill, Clint Black, Dwight Yoakam. He and I talked about the time-space continuum, Anne Murray, the Dixie Chicks, and of course, Shania. My Shania story has become infamous. It, by the way, is episode 40 on Later That Same Life. I got to hang out for over an hour with the band, all of them, save for Robbie Robertson. Jim Cuddy and I hung out for 2 hours. And there's another guy who's like your instant best friend. During that time, I also met some non-country celebrities. David Cassidy, Sheryl Crow, Gordon Jump. He's a TV actor. He played George Costanza's boss on Seinfeld during the final season. Speaking of, I met Kenny Kramer, the real-life Kramer, who at one time ran for mayor of the Big Apple. While in New York, I met Ray Liotta, very quiet and shy individual. I also talked to Robert Duvall for over an hour, but it was over the phone, and he just wanted to talk about the tango, the dance he loved so much. Country singer Laurie White actually asked me out to lunch after our interview. We really hit it off. I declined. I'm not sure what kind of Costanza move that was, but I declined. Years later, I saw her again, this time in the movie Castaway. You know, right at the end when Tom Hanks delivers that package that he'd saved on the island for so long, and he's literally at a crossroads, and this woman in a truck stops to talk to him. That's Laurie White. I could have gone out with a movie star. Hey, we could still be together, you know. She'd be touring the world, and I'd be right there, carrying her luggage. During the 1980s, there was a popular all-service car wash in downtown Toronto at King and John called Farbs. As promotions guy at CFTR, I was tasked with approaching Farbs for a co-promotion. The owner, a small, unassuming man, was not interested in doing anything with us, but he was very interested in talking about the movie posters in his tiny little car wash office. Animal House, Stripes, Heavy Metal, all movies by his son, director Ivan Reitman. He spoke so glowingly about his son in a way that really touched me. I thought, you know, if I ever meet Ivan Reitman, I'm going to tell him about that day with his dad. Years and years go by, and one Saturday morning, only a couple of years ago, I'm in Kensington Market, and there is Ivan Reitman and his wife. He pops into a store, so I ask her, I say, is that Ivan Reitman, and do you think I could meet him? And I do, and I tell him the story. I tell my Ivan Reitman story to Ivan Reitman. I don't think it changed his life by any means, but you know, when Ivan Reitman passed last year, it was especially moving to me. Well, that's it. That's my list. I think it's about 60. I don't know. Is that a lot? I think that's it. Pretty eclectic mix there. Again, some people I've worked with in media have achieved celebrity status. Don't mean to leave them out. I've met a lot of behind-the-scenes people, writers, directors, et al., that were like celebrities to me. I've held in my hand both an Oscar and an Emmy. Neither had my name on it, or for that matter, a name that you might instantly recognize. Of all the celebs, 99.9% were nice people. But then I thought, if they weren't, I probably would not have met them. There's probably an a-hole A-list that doesn't get to meet a lot of regular people because they don't want to. 43.4% of the celebrities I have met were shorter than I thought they would be. I don't expect to meet many more celebrities. 1, I'm not really in media anymore. 2, I don't get out that much. And 3, I've reached the demographic where I don't really keep track as much. What? You're famous? Okay. You know, when they announce the next host for Saturday Night Live, generally I have to Google them. Oh, and if any celebrity would like to meet me, my email is coming up in seconds.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.